Just when I thought the bell peppers were a lost cause, finally have another one popping up right there. It's been a couple of days since the first one and there haven't been any more, so I really thought maybe we were gonna have a big dud and I was gonna have to re-sow them, but looks like we might get lucky. And then the daisies already are seeing some activity, and just, I don't know if you can even see that one, it's so little, but I saw a little bit of green in a couple of these when I was watering this morning, so they're coming up quick. And then you might be able to see now the green onions that have sprouted. There's a few of them in here.
Hello, I have just clocked out for my lunch break and I'm getting ready to go change into some work clothes, and I'm going to head out to the garden and work a little bit. I'm just going to rake back the rocks and cut the fabric and dig a trench. I don't know how far I'm going to get on that on my lunch break, but I'm at least going to get it started because I don't know what condition the ground and everything is going to be in tomorrow, since we are supposed to get some possible severe weather tonight, which seems crazy to happen in February, but with our family's history, honestly, we definitely take that seriously now, because there was a tornado in 2017 in my hometown and it actually destroyed my grandparents' house. And I put together like a little video compilation of it. I'll have to throw it up on the screen here so you can see kind of what happened while I talk about it. Um, but it was the last day of February, February 28th, and the weather was a little different than it is right now. We've had upper 50s, and then today's supposed to get into the 60s, but that year it had been all week long like in the mid 70s, and it was high humidity and really muggy. So not quite the same, but it's still something that we take seriously, because their neighborhood, I don't know how many near misses they had over the years, and where they would have like trees taken out and things like that, but they never really had a hard hit. And so, because of that, my grandpa kind of got a little bit complacent, and my grandma was forever the worrywart. And so, we didn't always necessarily take her seriously because she irrationally worried about so many things. But that night, she was determined that the storm cell was heading straight for them, and she was insistent that my grandpa go to the basement. And he really didn't want to, because there was some news program or something coming on that he wanted to watch. And so she convinced him to just turn on the TV in the basement. And so they went downstairs, and evidently my boys had just been there, and they must have been arguing, from what they tell us now. They'd been arguing over something that one wanted to watch one thing and one wanted to watch the other. And so one of them took the remote and hid it from the other one. So Grandpa was down there trying to find the remote so he could turn the TV on and get to the channel he wanted to watch. And he couldn't find the remote and he was getting aggravated. So he kind of said, "The heck with it, I'm going back upstairs." And I guess he had put like his foot on the very bottom step, just getting ready to climb the stairs. And they heard this big boom and ran for the closet that was underneath the steps. And they said, like, right as they got in there, before they pulled the door shut, there's a door that went out to the garage, and it like swung open and then slammed shut. And they got the door shut, and then they said, within about 20 seconds it was all over. And they opened the door, and all of the blown in insulation out of the attic was just like swirling in the air so thick they almost couldn't breathe. But they were, I guess, pretty lucky, honestly, because Grandpa never went downstairs when they had storm warnings. We always just, we have so many tornado watches and warnings around here, but nothing ever happens. So it's easy to get complacent and just ignore it. And that's what they had always done. But Grandma was able to, fortunately, talk him into going to the basement that time, and it definitely saved his life, because the room that he would have been in, which I'll mark in the video as it's playing, was the worst hit. I mean, it was just a big sunroom, basically. It was all big, tall windows, and they had all shattered, and the roof was gone, and the walls were collapsed, and all the furniture was completely thrown across the room and overturned. So he definitely was very fortunate that he listened that time. Um, but it was crazy. It can definitely happen. And so ever since then, we take it seriously. And when there's a tornado warning, we go to the basement, no matter how inconvenient it is, because we realize that it only takes one time of ignoring it. And somehow, not a single person in their neighborhood died. And my grandparents' house was on the edge, so there was kind of a little bit of a dip, and it follows the lowest lying area. So they were the very last house that was fully destroyed and didn't just get like a little roof damage or shingle or siding damage or something like that. So there were a couple houses that were down in that little dip that were just wiped completely off their foundations. And there was one couple that actually didn't make it into the basement. They had just made it into the hallway, and that hallway was pretty much the only thing left standing in their entire house. So they were extremely lucky too. It was an EF4 tornado, so it's very much a miracle that no one died. One person did, not in their neighborhood, but it was a car that was traveling down the interstate that had gotten picked up, and there were two people in it, and one of them died. But that was the only death in that tornado. So just really crazy. But anyway, enough chit chat about that, because if I go on too long, I'm not going to have time to get any work done. So I'm going to cut this off here, and I will see you out in the garden here in just a minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get all this rock pulled back. And once I get it scooted as far as I can, I'm going to cut the landscape fabric and then start digging a trench. So I thought while I'm working, I could go ahead and tell you the rest of the tornado story from my perspective. So if you don't care, feel free to just fast forward right on through this part. Won't hurt my feelings any, but if you want to hear the tea, so to speak, then stay tuned. All right. Now that I have all of the rock scooted away, I'm going to snip the fabric right down the middle of this stretch, peel it back, and start digging. And now that I'm done making all the racket, I figured I would give you the tea on the rest of the tornado story, and give you my perspective of things, because I was not actually there when it hit, obviously, but I was there immediately during the aftermath. So it was February 28th, and right about 8 o'clock, our tornado sirens all went off. And I did what us Midwesterners always do, and went and opened up the front door and went out onto the porch, and I looked around, and it was relatively calm, not like still like they say it is during a tornado. It just was, a little windy. There was some lightning, wasn't even raining. And so I really just thought nothing of it. And I turned around and went back in the house and went back about my business. And next thing I know, my phone rings, and it's my mom. And of course, I assume that she's calling to be like, oh, there's a tornado warning. You better be in the basement, doing the usual mom thing. But she actually said Grandma and Grandpa's house was hit. And I was like, hit? What do you mean? Like, it took a minute for it to even register, because I had checked the radar and looked at the map, and it was the whole big red cell was going north of town, and they were north of town too, but it was going even farther north than they are. It looked like it was a few miles past them, and they were right at the very edge of it, where it was like green and looked like just a little bit of light rain. And so I wasn't worried and hadn't thought anything else about it until Mom called, and she said the tornado took Mom and Dad's house out. And I honestly don't even remember hanging up the phone with her. I just immediately dropped everything, yelled at the boys to come on, because Grandma and Grandpa's house was hit by a tornado and we had to go. And I was even still dressed from work. Like, I was still working in the office at that point. And so I was in dress clothes, like slacks and a button down and like slick flats and the whole 9 yards. And we just went like that. I didn't have a flashlight. All I had was my cell phone with the light on the back, but we left so quickly that we actually beat the first responders there. There was one police officer that was there at the edge of the road, and that was it at that point. And he let us go in, because I told him my grandparents were in there and I needed to get to them. And we didn't make it very far. We had to park the car on the highway. We couldn't drive down the street, and it didn't take us long to figure out why, because we get just a little bit ways down, and there's this big gigantic tree right in the way. And so, we climb over it. Once we get over it, and at this point my kids are about 10 and 12 also, by the way. So once we get over it, we run into more tree limbs and branches, and we're just like, what in the world? Because, you think tornado, I figure there's a few trees down. I expected to be able to drive up to their driveway. How naive was that? But I was not expecting a mess, because I didn't know at that point that it was an EF4. And then we end up in all of these tree limbs, all these branches, down power lines, which fortunately were off. But we ended up getting completely disoriented because nothing was familiar. I mean, we could barely see to begin with. It was so dark, but what we could see, just we didn't recognize anything. My Aunt Judy was just a few houses down from my grandma, and her house was one of the ones that was wiped completely clean off of its foundation. You know, we realized quickly that it was bad. There were houses missing. Nothing looked like we recognized nothing. We couldn't figure out where we were. We couldn't get our bearings. And it wasn't until we were about 2 houses down from my grandparents that we actually started recognizing where the heck we were. And then we get kind of up the hill and through the last of the trees and into my grandparents' yard. And Grandma is waiting at the front door, which honestly, thinking about it now is kind of comical because she held the front door open for us, but like the whole roof was missing above the living room. So it's just kind of comical that we have to cross a threshold and go through a door to get into a house that's wide open. But, you know, she was all in a tizzy. But my grandpa, he was just sitting there in a chair in the dining room because the way it had happened, it had ripped like the roof off the front half of the house in the back family room and then the back bedrooms. But the center part of the house was still under cover. And so it was raining still a little bit. But he was just sitting there in the chair in the dining room, just completely calm. Like he had to have been in shock. I even remember him saying that they could just go sleep in the bed in the basement because they had a guest room in the basement. And I was like, you are absolutely doing no such thing. You have no power. You don't know if there's gas leaks. Like the whole neighborhood is just, and by the way, there did happen to be a gas leak because when we went to go back in the morning, we couldn't get in for a while because they had to get that under control. But anyway, so my dad called while I was there too, and I told him what was going on. And so he came out, and by the time he got there, there were so many first responders that he couldn't even like get up the road, like up the highway. He had to go and walk out and around through the field and get kind of around the neighborhood so he wouldn't be stopped and would be able to get to us. But we went out to, they had like it had an attached 2-car garage, and then they had also a shed. And so we went out to the shed and kind of started bringing some things in. It had completely ripped the entire back wall or back room off of the shed because they had the first part, and then the back part, when my grandparents started growing ginseng, my grandpa's built a drying shed onto the back. And we had used that for storage, and my house was on the market at the time. I was selling my house there to move to this house here. And because my house had been on the market, I cleaned a bunch of my own storage out, and I had it at their house. So it just wouldn't look cluttered in the basement whenever I was showing my house. And so all of this stuff was gone, and like these big furniture pieces and stuff were gone, but yet all of my like storage totes and stuff were still there. And, you know, some of them had like books and things in them. So we kind of went and had taken those and carried them back up to the house because it was supposed to have another little storm front come through later in the night. So we did that. And once we got that completed, we got my grandparents and we decided to go. And I knew there was no way that we were going to be able to go back the way that I had come in because my grandpa, especially, his knees and stuff just don't work very well anymore. So we actually walked straight through their backyard, across through the neighbor's backyard to the highway because their road kind of did this, and then there was a highway back this way, kind of behind them. And there were nothing but fields on that end, so there weren't any trees or anything down on the highway. So we got through a little bit of debris in the yard behind them and got to the highway, and were able to walk back to my car from there. And by the time we got out to the highway, there were first responders. We had ambulances and fire trucks and police cars, and we had stuff from our town and from neighboring counties. And I bet they stretched a half mile up the dang highway. But we got to our car and took my grandparents to my house, and then my mom and stepdad, because at that time they still lived up in central Illinois, so they had to drive down, and they got in the middle of the night. And so I had all of them in my little bitty 900 square foot 2-bedroom house. Grandma slept with me, and Grandpa was on the couch, and I had to go out to Walmart at like 1 o'clock in the morning. Obviously this was pre-COVID, so Walmart was still open. So I had to go out there and buy air mattresses. And so anyway, that was that night. And then the next morning we had to go and start doing cleanup, which, you know, as I had already said, it took us a little while because there was a gas leak they had to get under control. But we got in and started cleaning up. And it was definitely one of the wildest experiences of my entire life because, I mean, you know, growing up in the Midwest, you see tornado damage. We'd have tornadoes from time to time. They never seemed to hit in town. They would always be out in the county. And we would drive around and look at the damage, and there'd be like trees down and things like that. And it was kind of cool to see the patterns that these tornadoes made as they went through. But, you know, nothing had ever hit like in town or in a populated area like that, because my grandparents' neighborhood was just right outside of town. It was at the edge of city limits. But anyway, that is the story. And I am finished digging this. I do need to go dig, I guess, down there, but I'm just about ready to fill it all back in with rock. So luckily it's going pretty quick. Another reason for raised bed gardening. Our natural soil here is just about pure clay. Not worth a darn for growing stuff, really. All right, I found where I ran the hose underneath of all of this. It goes straight back that way so that I can connect a soaker hose to lay through all these garden beds. But I'm going to have to cut this so that it will go underneath it. That way we don't have a hump here that blocks the water from the get-go. All right, I think I'm capped out for my lunch break, so I'm gonna have to stop here and come back and work on this, whether tonight or tomorrow or whenever the heck, but I've got to get more rock before I can finish it anyway, so even if it waits until tomorrow, that's fine. But anyway, I will see you soon.
all of the rock is in. And my little stepping stones. And the drainage is sorted. So the last step is going to be filling these beds, which I've already started doing, like filling in the holes in the blocks. I still have about half of that bed to go, and then I'm going to start filling up. I picked up the soil this morning and I only got 10 bags, which I know isn't enough to do it, but I'll get that in and then see how much I need yet from there. Oh, and I also got 6 bags of compost. But anyway, that's going to be on the next vlog. So I just need to fill in the drainage over there next to the shed. I don't know if you saw that vlog, but I have I don't even know what to really call it. They're just kind of like little plastic trays that guide the water. So I'm gonna go and put those last few bags in that, and that's gonna close out this vlog. So thanks for watching.